In the name of Allah, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So, we're going to put the topics that we've presented until now into maybe 4 or 5 big buckets. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this or not, but usually when I present a topic, I usually present it as though it's an objection or a question, and I try to answer it. So what I'm going to try to do is basically to present it in that same way. If someone, I'm going to play devil's advocate, if someone is asking this question, if someone is arguing with you with this, relying on what you have heard until now, what do you answer? Okay? So we're going to try to keep it not too long, inshallah, for this first part. And for the second part, maybe we can take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the month of Rajab. So for this first part, inshallah, this will give me a good indication of the extent to which everything has been properly assimilated, understood, if there are still objections, if there are still doubts about it, before we continue. I feel that over the past few weeks, we went through a lot of content, a lot of information, and the point is not just to cover as much as possible, it's to make sure that it's well digested and understood. And if it is the case, then we can start moving forward to the next topics. Otherwise, we'll just stop a little bit here, slow down, and make sure that the rest of the topics are well understood. So someone says, there is no point to study any religious questions or topics, either because, or both, either because there is too much information, so it's impossible to go through all of it, or we can never reach the truth in these items, in these matters. Fantastic.
Okay, so basically, if I'm pretty sure he's talking in a scientific view because he doesn't want to talk about the afterlife. So if he is, then I would say then why do people have a lot of scientific research about science and cancer research and all that stuff if it is just there is no cure for cancer until now they don't have a cure for cancer, so that's given the risk versus reward theory. So if it's just cancer for a bunch of people, then how about death for everyone? And death is going to happen to everyone and it's eternal. So wouldn't it be not smart to not study eternity and not to make sure what we're going to face in the after death?
So you've covered 2 of the, I'm looking for 4 points, you covered 2 of them very well. So we're going to add to them, but very quickly. The first point is that when there's a probability of reaching anything, we don't only look at the probability, we look at the probability and the value of what we're trying to get at. The probability sometimes may be low. That's if let's use the devil's advocate argument and say the probability may be very low, but the value of what we reach or we don't reach is going to be very high. In this case, it's eternity. If that is, even if the probability is low, if the value is eternity, it becomes a very high proposition, very important that we actually spend time studying it. Another point that you have made is generally human beings don't rely on this one argument that there's too much information, so therefore we just let it be. We don't spend any time, any effort, any money on it. That's not how humans work. And if we go into fields of science and any other field, we see that in action all the time. So what were you going to add?
I was going to take on the same thing, but it also answers the question of the 3 main questions that we usually have, where are we going, what are we doing here, and where do we come from? So, we instinctively want to know how to answer those questions, and it's, there's too much at stake to in this regard.
Okay, so this adds clarity to the point that I just made, which is the value, right? The value is too high, too much at stake, absolutely. So the other one, a very easy one, the two other points, one of them is just, this is a very lazy argument. This is the argument of the lazy person. Say there's too much information, I don't feel like it, or I'm not sure if the truth can be found. Okay, so that's one. Laziness is not an argument. And the last point about the truth is, well, it depends what tools you want to use. And that's why we spend a little bit of time saying there's different types of knowledge. We spent a lot of time on this. Multiple sessions, we talked about different types of knowledge, giving you access to different types of information, different types of data. It's not all equal. So if I'm trying to study things that are material, I need a material means to study them. If I'm studying things that are ideological and religious and philosophical, I need that type of knowledge to study them. I cannot rely on the material means, the empirical means to study that type of knowledge. So this is about different types of knowledge. So I'll agree with you that the truth may not be reached if you're using the wrong tool. If you use the right tool, you may actually reach the truth. Tell me, what tool do you want to use for this? Okay? Good. First question, you did very well. Second question. The second question is a claim, my claim, right now, that for someone to be really religious, it really means they're putting their reason and their objectivity and their logic aside. It's a matter of superstitions and a matter of, fairy tales and things that cannot be believed, and this is usually what religion is. It's not really scientific or rigorous. So people who are really rational and reasonable and logical, they cannot become really faithful and religious. That's my claim. That's my objection. Sure.
So you could use the claim, a counter claim that says, well, there are certain scientists who are atheists who, as you mentioned in the last jalsa, that they suggest that for certain formulas to work, you need to put reason aside, and you need to just park your reason, as they say, in order to make the formula works. For example, the idea of the nothingness being something in reality, but they call it nothing. And also, if you look at religion, it's a very judgmental point of view, and I would assume that the person haven't read a verse from the holy book, the Quran, which has many verses that request human beings to seek knowledge and to think critically and to question, which is kind of in contrast with the claim that they are proposing.
So the first point, I hadn't even thought about it, but it's excellent. The first point that you mentioned. We talked about it at the last session. The fact that even that may not be an argument. If it's your logic, then that's not enough, because some scientists do say put your logic aside, as we saw. The second point is excellent too, that in our case, in Islam at least, we can safely say for our religion, for our belief, that not only is it compatible with reason and logic, it's actually a necessity in order to be a believer in Islam, a practicant Muslim. If you want to be a good Muslim, then it is necessary upon you to have strong logic and strong reason. Islam rejects faith without reason and without logic. This is not considered a complete faith. Okay, there's one more point. These are excellent points. Yes?
So, kind of similar to the scientists. So, a lot of the people that we consider highly intellectual, a lot of them have, announced that, there is design in this world, and there is a designer basically behind all this world, very like I think you mentioned Einstein. Yeah, there's a lot more, so you could use that. Like if those because those people like obviously use their like intellectual because they really like use their reason a lot. So for them to come up with that conclusion, they're not parsing the reason, but using it to come up with that.
Yeah. So that was the other point. Excellent. Which is basically, if someone wants to argue this point, then who would they consider to be someone who is logical and objective and has not parsed their reason? So, if they can give me examples like them, the person who's objecting, or are they mentioning some, let's say, names of people who are generally universally accepted as having strong rationality, strong rational thinking, logic, objectivity, scientific minds, for instance, and so on and so forth, then in those cases we have many, many, many of them. From the Galileos to the Newtons to the Einsteins to Heisenbergs and Schrodingers and others. In fact, those guys who worked on the quantum mechanics and physics, they were not only believers in a God or in an entity. A lot of them are actually very mystical people too, and they believed of like the union of the soul with something transcendental and so on and so forth. So that was the last point. Now, a follow-up to that question, not necessarily someone objecting, but just between us. So are there any limits to this logic, to this reason? So we said, like, how does it really work? We said that in our religion, we're saying that logic and objective thinking and rationality are necessary. So does it mean that I can reach any answer I'm looking for through my reason? Or how does it work? So I know one hand here. Is there another hand? There's another hand there. Okay. There's one here. I'm trying to go with someone who hasn't answered yet, and then I'll let the others talk. The question, in short, is, are there limits to reason? And so I explained it to give you some clues and hints on what I'm looking for. Yes?
So basically, I respond with, so basically the question is asking, like, there are certain things you won't, like, attain through reason because of, like, the way religion has said it is. So, like, it gives, like, rules, but through reason you can't actually know what those rules are. So, you have, like, so then basically, because with your reason you reach the conclusion that religion is correct, therefore, those rules, whether, like, you can actually reason them or not, because your first basis, your first foundation is that the religion is correct, then basically the rules will be correct as well.
Okay. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, like, for everything primary of the religion, it has to be reason-wise, and then the things that follow up to it, which is secondary, just like the same way he said it, same thing he said basically, is it can, like, you can't, we're not that, like, God knows us more than we know ourselves. The Creator knows what He created more. Knows about the created more than the created knows about itself. So that's why we can't really reason it out at the end of the day. Like we can ask questions and find, like, answers and how it's, like, and how it benefit us. Sometimes we feel the benefits, but at the end of the day, it's not our choice. Like, it came down from the primary.
Okay.
So it's basically kind of the same thing. Like, if we believe in religion and we believe that it's the right way, then, like, asking, like, for example, there doesn't have to be an explanation for, like, for example, like, why do you have to do it that way or in that certain way? But if you believe that, you know, like, if you believe in the religion and you believe that, like, for example, Islam is the right religion, right? And that prayers, like, I guess, like, it's a good thing, or, like, I don't know how to explain it, but, like, yeah, like, if you believe that, for example, like, prayer is a good thing, you're not gonna worry about, like, oh, is the wudu, like, like, why do you have to wash your face twice, or wipe your face twice, or not 3 times? Like, that's really kind of insignificant. Yeah.
Okay.
You wanna go?
No, I just want to add something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Basically, like, to prove that point is basically, like, if we have an electrician that comes and does things, we don't ask him, why are you doing this, why are you doing that all the time. Like, he's a professional. We just have the primary trust in him, and then the rest is up to him. It's the same way with everything else, like a doctor. We don't ask, or like we don't ask him, why did you give me this medicine, you know. That's basically it.
So in the case of religion?
In the case of religion, like, we don't like, it's not our job to ask why we were asked to do a lot of things. Like, we just do them because primary, we trust this religion through logic. So secondarily, it's not in our place to ask why and, like, questions.
Okay.
So I would say that specifically, since we're talking about religion, so from religion itself, I would say that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, 1,400 years ago, he predicted, or let's say Allah already knew that this question was going to be talked about today, and actually the first 5 pages of the Quran talks about this this argument, which is there's, if I'm correct, or if I'm wrong, correct me, there are 2 different types of, well, there are multiple, but the 2 main ones that Allah mentioned in the Quran, 2 different types of reasoning. One will bring you closer to Allah, and one will distance you from Allah, and you can be one of the lowest ranks possible. For example, when the angels reasoned Allah and they questioned him, قال إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء. They reasoned that why would you create a khalifa in this earth, or a representative that will shed blood and cause corruption? And that was a good reasoning, because this is what they've seen before from the previous creations. And Allah responded that إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون. I know which of thou you don't know. And so they realized their limits, and they realized who they're speaking to and who they're reasoning. And then they say, they said, "Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamta." Like, they realized their limit. They stopped. They say, "This is beyond our knowing environment. This is the unknown. So we believe you based on our primary reasoning, just like you said." The second type of reasoning is the shaitan la'anahullah, when he reasoned Allah. Why should I bow down to Adam when you made me from fire and made him from clay? And this reasoning was was filled with arrogance, and that's what made him the way he is now. So I'd say these 2 reasonings can show you the difference.
One time you said, like, if you have a bucket and the whole ocean, you can't carry the whole ocean in one bucket. So basically, like, the human capacity can't handle like all the stuff with reasoning. So you can't apply logic and sense into everything that God has made, because it's above our capacity.
Okay, so do I want more? Is there more? I'll take more, of course. If it hasn't been mentioned, please mention it.
I mean, it's basically all the same, like, just more specific.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, for example, if you want to talk about religion specifically, you can come to the conclusion with reason that because there's design, because God created us, because all that God had to send a messenger for us. And then in the end, we trust in that because we came to that conclusion with reason. But the things the messenger tells us, we might not be able to reason it. So we still have to, because we understand the first conclusion, we trust the messenger because we know he was sent by God.
Mm-hmm. Good precision. So when I put it all together, yes, very, very good. Long story short, and you guys all said absolutely nothing wrong. Everything you said is good. It's just a matter of packaging it correctly, everything that you said. So the beginning the beginning point for a human being, as you said before, we have some fundamental universal questions that we're all trying to answer. Starting our search, our quest to answer those questions is a rational exercise. The end of that rational exercise should get us to the conclusions that the Sayid just mentioned. So basically, you are supposed to very easily, with your reasoning, reach the conclusion that there is a God and what kind of God there is, as we discussed over the past few sessions, which also means that he would not have left humanity without any guidance. So now it's a matter of reaching the right guidance. Once you reach, and inshallah we'll get into those specifics, we haven't addressed those yet, they will come over the next sessions. Once you reach, in our case for instance, that this is the man, Rasul Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he is the one that we can consider to be trustworthy with this kind of information, with this kind of message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we can rely with confidence, just like on the electrician or the mechanic or the doctor. Once we have established their credentials and we've established trust in what they're telling us because of a certificate or a diploma or their experience or what others say about them, we feel safe with the information that they're giving us, we can trust it. In the same manner, we can trust this person with the message that they're giving us. Now we have to take it one layer beyond that and say, okay, what's the point of religion? The point of religion, in one part of it, is simply to guide human beings in their affairs in this world and to solve the disputes between them. And there's a lot of conflict and there are a lot of issues, there's a lot of selfishness. And so how are you supposed to live individually and as a society? Okay, religion is supposed to provide that. And maybe human beings on their own, given enough time and maturity and experience, can reach a good part of that truth on their own. That is possible. Okay? But this is not the entire function of religion. Religion is not only about explaining to us how the economic system is supposed to work, how the political system is supposed to work, how the ethical system is supposed to work. There's also aspects of religion that are only the domain of religion because human beings don't have access to them at all. For instance, what does happen after we die? So for those things, this is where religion is the only means to get that information. There are other types of information that you have competing domains talking about them. But there are questions, there are fields that are the sole responsibility, the sole area of religion. For instance, what happens after we die? This is one example, and there are many others. So for those, this is where your reason has to be parked. As we said, the premises have to be correct. And even within that, there is a secondary set of reason, logic, rules that have to always be applied so that this information being called religion is constantly being checked and rechecked to make sure that this is actually religion. And it does not fall into the claim that religion is mythology and religion is superstition and religion is fairy tales. This has to constantly, the filtering has to constantly be there because we do not have access to the person saying it live right now. If we had to, we wouldn't have to do that. Additional step. Today we don't have access directly to the person who is the messenger in whom we can have that absolute trust. Therefore, that secondary layer of logic and reasoning and scrutiny and filtering has to always be working. We always have to be open to saying, okay, maybe we have to review and revise this aspect of religion because it may not have reached us in the proper way. This is actually not religion, and we've called it religion. Or the opposite, something that we missed, and this is part of religion, and we've just missed it. Other than that, you guys, everything you said is good, so I will not go back on it to save time. Next question. The proofs of God that we have presented. So if you present at least one proof. Some of them are require a little bit more explanation, and some of them are simpler. I think 4 of them we've presented properly, 2 in a lot more detail, but 2 we've talked enough about that I think they should be still easily presentable. So, the floor is yours. Proofs for the existence of God.
I think the first one too is necessary being
So there was three things in the world. There's impossible, possible, and necessary. So impossible doesn't exist in the real world, only in the head. And then we have necessary and possible. For possible, that's almost everything we know on the planet that contains the matter and energy. For the possible, we could we could really call it contingent, because it could not exist and it could exist. It doesn't really affect anything. So it's contingent on something else to exist. So like I'm contingent on my father to exist for me to exist. This water bottle is contingent on the factory to exist, and so on. So everything in the planet that is possible is contingent. But the problem with that is that if everything is contingent, then we'll have an infinite regress and nothing will exist. So we'll need a necessary being to push something from just being contingent to possible, the actual thing, and create basically the planet. And that necessary being would be considered like what we call Allah or God, and also this explains a few things of his traits, which is like that he is all knowledgeable and all powerful. Yes. So.
The proof itself is excellent. Can you just add what's wrong with infinite regress? You said so we have infinite regress. So what's the issue with infinite regress?
It's like we have a race, and then with 5 people, and then everybody's saying I won't start until the next person starts, and by that nobody will ever start because they're all waiting for each other. But if they start when a necessary person shoots the gun and they all start running, then it could start the race. So that's why we need a necessary being.
That last example needs better explanation. It's good. The beginning of the example was good, the race, but it needs to be stated a little bit differently. So, yes?
I'll explain. So basically, like if you have 5 people, same example, right?
Yeah.
5 people in a race, and like each one of those 5 are like, I'm not going to start until the person before me starts, right? So if you get to the first person, how is he going to start if he needs someone before him to start? So that means that like someone has to start it for them to, like he said, someone has to shoot the gun for them to start, or else they would all just be standing, and nothing would.
Okay, but the shooting the gun is an issue. You guys cannot use the shooting the gun, because you both said the condition for them to run is for someone to run before them.
Yeah.
So no one can run whether someone shoots the gun or not. If someone shoots the gun, no one is running. So there's another item that needs to be added that doesn't resolve the issue of the race, because the race is not going to be resolved, but it's going to resolve the issue for the world. Yes, Sayid.
So we came into this world with the race already starting.
Yes.
And so that, which means that somebody had to start running, and that one thing is not contingent because it doesn't need another person to run. It's necessary.
Exactly.
So that's
Anything else to add? Yeah?
No, I was just basically going to say, like, the infinite regress is because no one can start. So if you keep going back to that, like, the infinite regress is that you're going to keep going back to, okay, this person, we need this in order for that to happen, but we need one thing to actually cause everything else to happen, to avoid infinite regress.
A necessary being. Excellent. Okay. Good. So the proof of the necessary being is understood. Of course, explaining it in detail is a lot longer, but in summarized, that's good. Excellent. Another proof. Yes.
Okay, so the argument from design has like 2 premises, and you have to believe in them so you get to the conclusion. This is this world has design. Every design needs a design, and therefore there must be a design.
Okay. So that's a very short version. Can you explain just a little bit more on each part? The 2 premises?
Elaborate.
So if I said, elaborate, the opening.
That there is a design or like a purpose to everything. So like for example, a purpose of like fire is to burn, right?
Okay.
So that's its design. you know, or like, so basically like everything falling together in a perfect puzzle. And if you don't want to agree that, you know, it's not, it's just everything's a chance, then you can prove that, you know, like how good is this chance that everything happened to be that way, and you could use your example of the genetic code or the arrow and hitting it every time to prove that there is design.
Everything you're saying is correct.
Yeah.
I just want it to be more methodological. You just said the argument is two premises and a conclusion. So the two premises are, one, there is design in the world. Two, design needs a designer. Or design needs intelligence. Or purpose needs intelligence. Or purpose needs designer. Someone who puts the purpose in place, intends the purpose, so on and so forth. So, if I tell you elaborate, then you have to take each one of the premises and elaborate on it. So now what you said, where does it fall? First or second?
Oh, haven't even started.
So the first argument is what? The first premise is what? There is design in the world. So how do you elaborate on that?
I was explaining, like, I gave the example of like the fire or like water, for example, or like anything natural, and how like it has a purpose, basically. Like it has some place in the world.
Okay.
Like, it's just not created for nothing, like, you know.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's premise one.
Yeah.
Premise two.
What is it?
Premise two is, and design needs a designer.
Oh yeah, so like you can't give an example of something that doesn't have a designer if it's material. Like you can give me any example and I'll tell you. There's no example. Yeah, that's you know what I mean?
Yeah, so the absurdity of noticing something that clearly has intent and purpose and intelligence and still saying that it has no design, right?
Yeah.
So it's by absurdity, that showing the absurdity of it. And whether the person actually saying this really believes what they're saying, or are they making an exception of logical thinking only here because it's God and that's what we're trying to do. Okay, so yes?
So you can like elaborate on the design part a lot. Like you can bring many examples. I think one of the examples we brought is like there is no absolute knowledge in the world. So like, you know, all the equations we make up or all the science I guess we have is not absolute. It's good enough, basically. And so no one has that, like, I don't know, like I took this class, it's called numerical modeling. They basically like you do model like simple stuff, literally someone falling off a parachute, and then realize how complicated it is just to like model someone jumping or someone like doing like something that we consider very simple, and you don't even model it to a point where it's like that exact same thing. You model it to a point where it's good enough, and so like can you like then you just say like, you know, that must have design, since like we can't really obtain that absolute I guess knowledge, or yeah.
Okay. So design has just two layers. That's maybe the last point I'd add for especially the first premise. I would add that it has two layers. So one layer is when we look at things in themselves, and we want to say they have design or they have purpose. When you look at a thing on its own, the argument, the strength of the argument is not there. As strong as that can be, if it's properly done, that on itself is not the full strength of the argument. The strength of the argument is when you start compounding that with everything around that, whatever entity you took and showed the design. If you take any other entity and you show its design on its own, you're still at level one, first order design, let's call it. But when you compound them and you say, what are the chances that both of these were designed in this way? And everything else required for them to be. So, and this is where you start compounding the argument to one thing within the other, and you go from a one order to a much higher order of complexity.
What do you mean by compounding with one another?
So you can look, for instance, at a cell. Okay, and this is like entire books this thick have been written on parts of how a cell works. Okay, an animal cell, let's say. And then the complexity of all of that, which is very complex, as strong as that is, takes a completely different meaning if you say, and all these cells have to work together for the eye to do its function, because the eye is made up of cells. Oh, okay, so that's a completely different order of thinking and complexity. And you say,
It's like a
but for the eye to work, it needs a nervous system, which is all made up of cells, and it needs a muscular system, and it needs a skeletal system, and then it needs to be connected to a brain, and the brain needs a cognitive system for all of this to be able to see an image and interpret it properly. And this is where you start seeing what we mean by design. It's one thing to say the cell works. No, the cell doesn't just work. The cell works in that very meticulous way in combination with all the other cells. Oh, and then the same cell is also in the heart, but over there it makes a heart when it's combined with the other cells. And here it's making a liver, and over there it's making bones, and here it's making muscles. And all of this is supposed to get, you see, the order of complexity. This is what I mean by compound. So you look one thing, it's like you multiply the complexity by more complexity, the design by more design. It's one thing to at one level, you're only talking about everything on its own. You're talking about a bird, or a tree, or a seed, or the wind, or rain, each one of these, and you can show the complexity and the design in it. It's a completely different argument when you say, oh, for the bird to survive in that ecosystem, it has to eat those seeds that fit into its neck in that, from that tree that grows from that rain around in that environment and that climate, and that's a completely different argument, right? Yeah.
Can I add something on the second premises?
Yeah.
So basically, I remember us saying that for an engineer to design something, he has to have knowledge of it. So this is like a proof to say that God is all-knowing, and that's why, that's what I wanted to add.
Excellent. So what you're adding is, we said one of the things that we have to keep in mind is the proofs for the existence of God are not all the same. Right? Some of them have strengths and weaknesses, or they're different. So we have to know how they're different. So the proof of the necessary being proves the necessary being. But if I want to prove the knowledge, if I want to prove the power, I'm going to have to add sub-arguments to it. The argument from design already proves that not only that designer exists, but that he has power and knowledge in order to be able to design the way he designs. Excellent point. Other arguments? Two very quick ones, yeah. Or three, yeah.
We didn't talk about this one, but was like, this is going with the premise like that. If there is a God, he is perfect. So then it's more perfect to exist than to not exist.
We didn't talk about that.
We didn't talk about that one?
Yeah, it's an okay argument. It's arguable.
What about the instinct argument?
The instinct argument we talked about, and it's a good one. And there's two versions of it. So go ahead. Give me what you have.
All I can remember is that basically, whenever you're, like any human is in any situation, especially if it's a hardship, for example, our minds and our hearts basically gravitate towards certain thoughts, certain feelings that basically tells us that there's something else, that's something that we can rely on, kind of thing, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so you call that instinct, which is good. So the argument from instinct, so it's kind of like the universality of this feeling. Okay? So now, this is at the individual level. Now let's talk at the humanity level. Let's talk at the society level.
So morality, I guess?
No, not morality.
Is that a different argument?
That is a different argument that we really didn't delve into. We mentioned it. I don't think anyone would mention morality. The argument from the good, that there is good and goodness and a recognition of the good. So where does it come from? So for those interested, you go to Immanuel Kant. He really pushed that argument. But you said, basically, there's a universality. All human beings are wired this way. But what you presented right now, that's why I said there's versions of the same argument. The version that you talked about, which is valid and excellent, is at the individual level. If we look at every person, now look at the same idea, but now let's take communities and societies and the history of humankind together. We're not talking about individual humans. What do we get? Yeah.
So throughout history, like civilizations, they've all had gods, and like in history, we've always had something to explain what was happening and why we're here and what would happen after. So we gravitate to that other being that's controlling. So it's found in all of civilization throughout time. It's not a new concept.
So what does that tell us?
That this is something that's been here from time and it's not going to change? Or
Yes.
I think maybe what you're looking for is that it's something that's inside everyone, and that.
So what's the word?
universal.
Distinctive.
Universal. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. And use it when you talk about that. It's important. The universality of the religious feeling, the universality of the religious need, the universality of the spiritual need of humanity. And. No matter how you look at it, this has been confirmed again and again by anthropology, by psychology, by the only disagreement is sometimes you have people like Freud, like others, who come back and reinterpret. And they don't negate, they don't disagree that the feeling is there, but they say the feeling is not being interpreted properly. And here's a proper interpretation. So in the case of Freud is all about the father figure and your relationship with the father figure. So he says God is basically the ultimate father figure that human beings have to get past at some point in order to, as a society, to evolve. Just like a human being resolves the issues with the father at some point as they're maturing and growing up, the same thing has to happen to humanity, and they have to. So it becomes a matter of interpretation. Okay, but all of them recognize that we are wired in a way, so this is for us as believers, keep that in mind. The agreement is we are all wired, all human beings that we know of that have ever existed are all wired in a way that leans towards God, that leans towards the absolute, that recognizes sacredness, that requires an attachment and a link and a relationship with that, and when we don't, we have issues. It creates problems at an individual level, at a psychological level, and at a societal level. And this is, if you read things like the crisis of modernity and things like that, this is what they concentrate on. What has happened since then is all sorts of issues in society. Of course, it has advantages, but it has also created a whole set and slew of problems in society that haven't been resolved yet. And my contention is they're trying to resolve them by putting everything in religion, just not calling it religion. It's all still here. Instead of saying, there is consciousness and love and sacredness in a entity that is a god or a divinity, now they're saying matter is like that. And you can connect back with the universe and with matter and with Gaia, the Mother Earth, and with energy, and it's all one thing, and it's all conscious and breathing. This is what they're... Why do we go there? Why are they going there? It's because there's a need. And it needs to be met at some point. So either you say, we can just ignore that need, human beings are weird and created wrong, or you say, but why is that need there? Where does it come from, and what are we supposed to do with it? We have a need for food, and it's good. We have a need for water, and we feel it, and we do something about it, and it's good. So why is that need bad, or should we ignore it, or what are we supposed to do with that one? Okay, that's the link to be made with the universality of religion throughout history. Okay? There's a last argument that we spent a little bit of time on, but we kind of said, don't rely on that one. Do you remember it? It's a good argument that is useful and will be more useful later in our sessions, that the topics that we presented and the notions that we presented in it, but we said do not rely on this argument for establishing belief in God or belief in anything firm. Yeah.
Is it the sustainability one?
No, and I don't know what that is. I know what that means. I don't remember we talked about that.
Okay.
Sustainability.
Like we need a person to keep us go. We need something that keeps us going. Without a baby without a mother would die. And like you without water would die of thirst. Just how this earth needs something to keep it going. Why would the earth not need something to keep it going? And then that thing would need something else to keep it going. So we need something that gives everything sustainability in total.
So do you mean existence, for the thing to exist, or the details of its existence, or the existence itself?
No, what I mean is something to make it keep going. Something that feeds it to survive. Like we all need something to feed us.
Yeah.
To sustain us, basically.
Yeah.
And that for that reason we need the ultimate sustainer, and that's God, because everything needs to be sustained except for basically the same as the necessary being, but in a different way.
Yeah, so it's a creatorship, and we're going to come to that. It's the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's good.
That was, we talked about that under the legislative and the...
Yeah, that's in the attributes.
And
We're coming to it.
Because when we talked about, what were the two, legislative and the other one was...
Existential?
Existential, so that was part of existential, that everybody receives this mercy.
Lordship,
like
yes.
Heartbeat,
I'm not sure, I don't know if you mentioned it or if it relates to what you guys say, but the counter argument would be prove that God doesn't exist, and I'd say, well, then the conclusion would be that we came from nothing, which is what is the biggest theory going on, which is the Big Bang Theory, that everything was created from ultimately nothing. And if you look at it mathematically, a zero cannot have a value whatsoever, no matter how long you stare at it, unless you add a 1 to it, then it starts having a value. And if you take that zero from that one is still there. But if you take that 1 away, then we come back to that nothing. So how can your argument be valid? If just the fact that you're thinking about prove to me that God doesn't exist, it means you're in that universal concept of the need to answer that question, which is prove that God doesn't exist. It's the curiosity in you, coming from the instinct mind.
From a logical or they call it dialogical, in a discussion or a polemic point of view, keep in mind that this is considered don't go there if you don't need to. Don't go there because you can't prove a negative. Okay, so don't open that door. Don't say, prove to me that something doesn't exist. That's usually it's a fallacy. Don't do that. But I understand the other points you're making, and it's in relation to the last session that we had, right, with the universal nothing. So we'll come back to that in a second. Yes?
The fourth one, like Pascal's wager argument?
Well, that's a probability. We talked about it, probability and value. It was the religious experience. I don't know if you guys remember when we talked about the religious experience, the types of knowledge that we can have. One of them is the type of knowledge that we get through religious experience. So do you remember what we said about that?
Didn't we say that not everyone has that experience, so we can't rely on it?
Good.
Yeah, like miracles, maybe.
No, the religious experience. I don't know. I don't remember. We talked a little bit about miracles. I wasn't expecting. There was stuff coming up that I didn't think you guys would bring up now. It's good. So the religious experience, basically, we said we cannot really rely on it because it's not reliable, because it's not a universal, because it's very variable between one person and another, between one condition and another. In the same person, it may work one time and not in another, and so on and so forth. So we don't want to use something that is so unreliable to say, this is what we're going to establish our truths upon. We're going to rely on reason. And that's why we're studying all of this through reason, not through religious experience. Not to say that all religious experience is wrong or bad or unreliable. Okay, but the most that can be said is that it's reliable for the person having it, if it can be established for them that it's reliable. But it cannot be generalized to someone beyond them. Okay? Okay. Next point. Okay, attributes. So can someone talk to me about the attributes of God? First of all, first distinction is what? There are two types of attributes, yes.
I don't know if it's right or not.
Yeah.
All knowing and all knowing, all knowledge would be.
That is an attribute, yes.
It's not the way it looks.
He's asking about the distinction between the.
Yeah.
Isn't there, it's action and,
Is life one of them?
Life is one of them,
wait, because
and knowledge is one of them.
Action. And
These are attributes of what? Are they attributes of action?
no, the essence.
Thank you. Okay, so there's two types of attributes. There are attributes of essence and attributes of action. So what's the difference between them?
I think the essence, like the thing in itself,
Okay.
and action is, I don't know, action. Like, I don't know.
There's two ways. There's more than more than two ways, but we explained, I think, two ways to understand attributes of action. Yes?
So the attributes of action is the names that he described that we can get closer to him through them, but the attributes of essence is what makes him unique. So in a way, for example, if you say Ar-Rahman, which is the most merciful, you can become closer to that action description of Allah, because you can forgive a lot of people and become closer to that ultimate perfection of Rahman. But if you, for example, you say Allah, you can never be closer to that because it's one unique, and there's I'm sure there's not a single name on the universe that has that uniqueness. So that would differentiate the essence and action, in my point of view.
Okay, this is arguable. We didn't talk about this. We'll come back to it. Yes?
Well, I was just gonna say that within the attribute of essence or action, there is like a negative and a positive. So you can say God is living, or he is not dead, or like for an action, let's say he is giving or not what's the word? Like he doesn't keep stuff for himself, not selfish.
Okay. That's good. That's really good. Yes.
I think what you're looking for is the attributes of action. Action is what it means is that it has a reaction. It has a connection with something else. So basically, the attributes of action of God is the things that he uses to connect with us, or like the ways he's the types of connections that he has, and what they are with his creation.
Excellent.
But the essence is the things that he is, that
And
nothing
himself.
else is for himself.
Yes. Excellent.
And the action ones all derived from the essence, right?
Excellent. Yes. Okay. So essence is what he is in himself. Yes?
Don't they all derive from like ilah? Allah.
Allah, not ilah.
Allah?
Yes.
Okay.
But Allah is a proper name.
Okay.
It's not a notion.
Yeah.
So it's the proper name for all of the attributes combined. But the moment you go into the attributes, then you have your attributes of essence, and they're not all at the same level. Some of them are higher. So those that are higher, you can derive the lower ones from them in essence. And then you derive the attributes of action from the attributes of essence. And the same thing can be done. You can derive those that are lower from those that are higher. Those that are more generic, you can use them to derive those that are more specific from them. Okay. Now, the unique part. First of all, yes. So why is it important to study the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
To get closer to him,
Why?
so we can become better worshippers.
Okay, but why the attributes?
To understand him.
Yes. Because we cannot understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. We cannot understand His essence directly. all we have access to are the attributes, which are our human way of understanding an entity like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is absolute and absolutely simple. There's nothing like it. So how do we understand something like that? The closest way we have is to understand it by looking at it from different angles, and those angles are the attributes. Okay? That's why we spend time studying the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes?
Basically, it's like a amal shaitan, that you try to look at God at Himself and try to know what it is. You have to look at the things around Him and what He does to things. Like just like how Rasulullah Musa, he asked to see God, but he couldn't even handle it. So it's like you can't. It's not something you can see directly.
Yeah.
That's
So
why we learn.
that story is very arguable. So we're not going to talk about it now. Okay. That's the first. The second thing is yes, but that's like the non-rational way of understanding it is to say it this way. Okay. The rational way to say it is it's impossible for a human mind to understand an entity like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes.
Okay, so the reason why it would be mentioned as amal shaytani is because it will only lead to confusion. And if you don't have the proper tools, rational tools, if you have them and you know how to think properly, you'll say it's impossible, therefore I have to go at it from a different way, so I'm going to go at it through the attributes. And the attributes are basically looking at what you said beside, or you're looking at different aspects. But you can't look at the thing in its fullness, cannot be grasped. Okay, so what it can lead to if you don't have that reaction, if you don't have those tools, it basically leads to either kufr or shirk or basically misunderstanding. There can be no other outcome. Okay? Can someone just enumerate some of the attributes that we studied? So what are the 3 attributes of essence that we studied? 2 of them were already mentioned.
Then life and knowledgeable.
Life and knowledge were mentioned. One more? Power. So those are the attributes of essence. So what are the attributes of action that we studied? Lordship.
Guider, like
Pardon?
guidance.
Guidance is under what?
Lordship.
Al-Hidayah is under Lordship. Rububiyyah. Okay?
He's all truthful, all honest.
Truthful. Sidq. Which is important. Why? Why do we need this attribute?
Because then we know that we're not being deceived.
We need it for religion and for scripture. Right?
Okay.
So it establishes that once you've understood the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what kind of God He is, and you've established that one of the aspects, one of the attributes of Allah is that He's truthful, then you can rely on a message that comes from Him as being a truthful message.
How do you prove truthfulness?
It derives from the others. We said truthfulness is associated with speech, and speech is will, and will is... Anyways, we'll come back to it, and this is an attribute that we're going to come back to when we talk about divine justice a little bit, and wisdom and all of that. Okay, I just mentioned others, yeah. Wisdom, yes, good. Creatorship, yes. So you said lordship, creatorship, and there's one that goes. Those 3 go together. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who created, and if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who guided the creation, then for us, what does it mean?
Divine.
Divinity, exactly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is divine in the sense of, in Arabic we say uluhiyyah, which in practice means the only one worthy of being worshipped. It only makes sense to worship this kind of entity because it is the only entity that would have created you and that has given you everything you have in the sense of lordship, which is your guidance. So there's the legislative guidance and there's the existential guidance. What about will? Can someone explain to me the difference between the 2 types of will that we discussed? Yeah, these are the words that I just said for the lordship. We said there's 2 types because lordship is about guidance, about taking care of, upbringing, managing the affairs of. This is lordship. What about will? Yeah.
There's existential will and legislative will.
Yeah.
So basically, existential will is is the thing that we can't control. It's not under our controlling. But like a part of the existential will is the things that make us. So if we don't have the, if we don't do it, then we wouldn't be us. Or maybe I'm talking about like something else, but it's still existential and legislative. But they sounded the same. That's why I'm saying.
Try to. Yes.
Legislative will is what he wants us to do.
Okay.
As in like the religious rules and practices that we have to comply with, scripture and all that.
Yeah.
And existential would be him giving us free will.
Okay.
No, that's the opposite.
You're the opposite.
Is it the opposite?
No, he's right, but
Keep going.
existential.
So he basically he willed us to exist, and he willed us to have free will. And so basically, with that free will, we either follow his legislative will or we don't. I don't know how to explain existential will more than that.
Okay.
Isn't it like if it says something to be, like kun fayakun, that's
Yeah.
like the existential part.
Yeah.
And then the other one is like legislative is where we have kind of the option whether like we can do it or not, if we want to do it or not. But he wants us to do it, like he tells us what's right and wrong, but like we have the choice in that one.
Okay. So what are you saying?
I don't. Did you say the existential?
Which one do you agree with?
No.
Which one do you say? بعدين come out.
Okay, so what I think the existential will is the will.
You have to have skin in the game.
That is a must. That has no freedom to it. For example, the heart, your heart beats the way it does. You can't tell your heart to beat 3 times or 5 or 10 times. It beats the way it is. It has its own flow, and it's. For example, your liver works the way they are. Your whole internal system works the way they do. But however, the legislative will is, for example, your mind. You have the freedom to sin or to do good. You have the freedom to worship Allah or not worship Allah.
Okay. So I understand now. It seems you guys are talking about the same thing and calling them differently. You're actually both right. Okay, so the legislative will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the will is the want of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does He want from us? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants something legislatively, it means He wants it through a law. So He puts a law in place, and then we have the choice to follow that law or not. But we don't call the free will itself legislative will. Okay? Our free will is our free will. The legislative will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the law that has been put in place, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to obey it. Allah's wanting of us to obey that law is a legislative will. It's not an existential will. Because if Allah wills something existentially, the existence of something, it just is. And this is the part that you have no control over. Right? Make sense? Okay, so it's the power of Allah in action. That's the existential will. That's it. There's no, it may be, it may not be. Once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, intent is applied to something, His power is in action. That's it. It happens.
But can't you say a part of our existential will is to have legislative will? Like is to have free will?
Yes. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when I do something, He allows me to do it. So this is when we're trying to answer the question of, okay, so how can I sin? How can someone go and kill Imam Hussein alayhi salam? Did Allah allow them to do it? Did Allah will the killing of Imam Hussein or not? So this is where you have to say, well, it depends. Do you mean legislatively will it or existentially will it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislatively, He did not will it. He prohibited it. He said this is unlawful. You're not allowed to do it. But existentially, He willed it. He gave the people the power, the tools, everything they need to do what they do, which He summarized as having the free will to do it. He gave you everything you need to do whatever you gotta do, whatever you choose to do. This is the existential will. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do anything. Your power to do anything, the power to exist and to have a free choice and to decide and to go through with your decision, all of that is coming from God. Your decision in there is yours. But something is giving you power and allowing you to do it. This is God. But this is God's existential will. Even though He prohibits it legislatively, He has to allow you existentially to see what you're going to do with it. He gives you the power to do both. Okay? Okay. What's the difference between deism and theism? Yes.
Deism is like the idea where it's not a personal God. It's just some like natural, supernatural force that created everything. Well, theism is more like of a personal God, or they would say like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism believe in. Yeah.
Okay. Good? Clear? Deism is just like a first mover. He doesn't know we exist, doesn't care about us, you don't worship it. It's just an entity. It's an energy, a power, that's it. Could be the universe. This is all deistic gods. Theistic gods are personal gods. So this is important because it follows. One of the reasons why we study the attributes of God is because we want to understand what kind of God are we talking about. When I say God exists, which God is it? Is it the deistic God who doesn't even know I exist? He doesn't even know maybe the world exists or that He exists? Is just a power or an entity? Or is it a personal God that wants things from me and I can worship and I can connect to and I can pray to? This is a theistic God. So this is theism, believing in a personal God as opposed to believing in a transcendental entity. That would be deism. Okay? So that's it for the first part. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.